On the desolate world of Xora, where the air burned and the ground cracked beneath the weight of survival, Jenna moved like a shadow across the plains, her steps heavy and deliberate the earth. Beneath her, a constant reminder of the hostile world she called home. Xora was a death world, its environment a living nightmare for any creature unprepared to face its dangers. The sun was a relentless blaze in the sky, and the storms tore through the landscape with a fury that made survival an art form. Jenna had learned the rules of this world long ago, and they were simple: survive or die. And she had chosen survival time. And again her skin had hardened from the constant battle against the elements, her senses sharp from years of hunting the deadly predators that roamed the land. She was a living weapon forged by a world that cared nothing for weakness. Jenna had been alone for as long as she could remember. Her species had long since vanished, swallowed by the planet's wilds. She was the last of her kind, a survivor among survivors, and she wore that title with a pride that burned in her chest. But even with that pride came the cold knowledge that she was truly alone. No one else could possibly survive on this planet. No one else was made to live here, not the soft aliens from the stars, not the delicate beings from other worlds. Jenna was the apex predator, the only Deathworlder who had ever thrived in such an unforgiving place. There were stories of other worlds where species lived in peace and harmony, their environments tempered by the gentle hand of nature. But those were not her stories. Xora was a place where only the strongest could endure, and Jenna had learned to embrace its brutality. She knew nothing else. She had fought beasts that could tear a lesser creature in half, fought storms that would level entire forests, and fought the solitude that threatened to break her mind at times. But today was different. As Jenna moved through the dense jungle, her senses heightened to every snap of a twig and every shift in the wind. She felt something change, something out of place, a strange vibration in the air that set her nerves on edge. It was a sound unlike anything she had ever encountered, the sound of something large descending from the sky, a massive object tearing through the atmosphere, crashing to the earth. With a deafening roar, Jenna froze instinctively, her heart pounding in her chest. The ground trembled beneath her feet, as if the planet itself was reacting to this intrusion. The scent of burned metal and ozone filled the air. She hesitated for a moment, standing perfectly still, her eyes scanning the horizon, her instincts screaming at her to move, yet something compelled her to approach whatever it was. It was something new, something foreign, something that didn't belong here. She moved silently through the underbrush, each step calculated and careful. As she drew closer, the wreckage of the fallen craft came into view. It was like nothing she had seen before, its smooth metallic surface reflecting the harsh sunlight in strange patterns. The wreckage was still smoldering, the smell of burning fuel thick in the air. And there in the center of it all, lying unconscious and vulnerable, was a creature unlike any she had ever seen, a small being wrapped in strange fabric, its skin pale and delicate, its breath shallow but steady. The sight of it left her momentarily speechless. Jenna's hand instinctively went to the weapon at her side, a long curved blade honed to perfection, ready for any threat. Yet she could not move. She simply stared at the human lying there, helpless and completely unaware of the predator that stood just a few feet away. Jenna stood over the human, its small body barely moving as it lay unconscious in the wreckage. She watched it carefully with a sharpness that could cut through the silence of the jungle. Her instincts told her to strike, to eliminate this new threat before it had the chance to grow. But there was something about it that held her in place, a sense of unfamiliarity that gnawed at the edges of her mind. The creature was fragile, soft in ways she couldn't comprehend, but there was an undeniable aura about it, something deep in the way it breathed, even in its unconscious state. Her hand tightened around the hilt of her weapon, her mind racing with questions. Why had this being come to her world? What was it doing here? And what could it possibly want with Xora? She had lived so long on this planet, where only the strong could survive, and every living thing she had encountered had been a challenge. Even the smallest creatures could be deadly. The thought of a creature so delicate surviving here seemed impossible, yet this human had fallen from the sky and lived. Jenna's mind shifted as she crouched beside the fallen human, her gaze softening for just a moment. She had always been alone on Xora, the last of her kind. She had never encountered anything like this creature before, never seen such weakness. Yet it was alive, perhaps not for long, but alive. Nonetheless, as she studied it further, she noticed a faint pulse of life beneath its skin, a heartbeat slower than hers, but steady nonetheless. There was something resilient about it, a strange kind of stubbornness in the way it clung to life. After a long moment of silence, Jenna made her decision. She couldn't leave it there to die. She had never been one to help others, not when survival was the only rule that mattered, but something in this moment shifted. A small voice in the back of her mind told her to keep it alive, to find out what made it different, what made it endure. With surprising gentleness for someone who had lived her life in constant battle, she lifted the human from the ground, its body light in her arms, but fragile. She couldn't help but notice how small and powerless it seemed in comparison to her strength, her primal power that had been honed over years of surviving this cruel world. She had been the apex predator here, and yet she had never encountered anything quite like this. She carried it back to her shelter, tucked deep within the jungle, far from the dangers of Sora's more vicious predators, where she had made a home amidst the savage landscape. Her shelter was simple, made from the bones of beasts she had killed over the years, woven together into something that could withstand the worst storms. But she knew it would not be enough to protect this fragile human from the true dangers of the planet, not unless she did something more. Once inside, she laid the human down on a bed of moss and carefully began to assess its injuries. Its breathing was shallow but steady. The small cuts and bruises on its face would heal quickly, but there were deeper wounds from the crash that would need care. Jenna could see the signs of internal damage, bruising beneath the skin that indicated broken ribs. Her fingers hovered above the wounds, her mind racing with what to do next. She was not a healer, but she had learned much over the years. She had survived through trial and error. And now she had a creature in front of her that defied everything she knew about survival and strength. She was the one who had always been at the top of the food chain, but here was something new, something that had fallen from the sky and managed to survive where others would have died. She hesitated for just a moment before she began to tend to the human's wounds with careful hands and a mind that was now overwhelmed with curiosity. What was this being that had landed on her world, and why had it not perished like all the others? Jenna observed the human as it regained consciousness, its eyes fluttering open to reveal a deep blue hue that seemed to reflect the vastness of the sky above Sora. She watched as it took in its surroundings, its gaze shifting from the alien landscape to the shelter she had crafted with her own hands, and then back to her standing before it, a towering figure in the dim light of the shelter. The human's lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. Instead, it simply stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She stood motionless, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable as she studied the human's every movement, its body language, its subtle shifts in posture. All of it told her that it was assessing her just as she was assessing it. The silence stretched between them, thick and palpable, until the human finally spoke, its voice soft and tentative. "Where am I?" it asked, its words slow and deliberate, as if choosing them carefully. Jenna's lips curled into a faint smile at the simplicity of the question. She had expected something more profound, perhaps a plea for help or an expression of fear, but instead she was met with a straightforward inquiry about its location. "You are on Sora," she replied, her voice low and steady, "a world where only the strong survive." The human's brow furrowed as it processed her words, its gaze shifting to the walls of the shelter, the crude furnishings, the remnants of her life scattered around the space. "Sora," it repeated softly, as if tasting the name on its tongue. "And you are?" "Jenna," she interjected, her tone firm. "The last of my kind." The human nodded slowly, as if understanding the weight of her words. It seemed to consider her for a moment before speaking again. "Why did you save me?" it asked, its voice tinged with a mix of gratitude and confusion. Jenna's gaze softened slightly at the question. She had asked herself the same thing countless times. Since bringing the human into her shelter, she had no clear answer, no logical explanation for her actions, but something deep within her stirred a sense of connection, a recognition of something familiar in this fragile being before her. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "perhaps because you are alive." The human studied her intently, its eyes searching hers, as if seeking the truth behind her words. After a long pause, it nodded, as if accepting her answer. "Thank you," it said simply. Jenna inclined her head, acknowledging its gratitude, but she could not shake the feeling that this encounter was more than mere chance, that the human's arrival on Xora was part of a larger design, a purpose yet to be revealed. As the days passed, Jenna observed the human closely, noting its resilience, its adaptability to the harsh environment of Xora. It learned quickly how to forage for food, how to build shelter, how to defend itself against the planet's myriad dangers. It was as if it had an innate understanding of survival, a drive to endure that mirrored her own. She found herself intrigued by the human's behavior, its unwavering determination, its refusal to succumb to the challenges of Xora. She had never encountered anything like it before, and it both fascinated and unsettled her. One evening, as they sat around a fire, Jenna watched the human as it carefully prepared a meal, its movements precise and deliberate. She noticed the way it handled the tools with ease, the way it seemed to find comfort in the simple act of cooking. "Where are you from?" she asked, breaking the silence, her voice laced with curiosity. The human paused for a moment, its expression unreadable, before it replied. "Earth." "Earth," Jenna repeated, the word unfamiliar on her tongue. "And what is Earth like?" The human smiled faintly, as if recalling a distant memory. "Earth is a world of contrasts," it said, its voice distant. "It has its beauty and its dangers, its peace and its chaos, but it is home." Jenna nodded, slowly processing its words. She could sense the deep connection the human had to its home planet, the sense of belonging that she had never known. As the fire crackled between them, Jenna realized that this encounter was changing her in ways she could not yet comprehend. The human was not just a survivor like herself. It was a reminder of something she had lost long ago, a sense of kinship, a shared history, a connection to something greater than herself. And for the first time in many years, Jenna felt a flicker of hope stir within her, a hope that perhaps she was not as alone as she had believed. As the days passed, Jenna and the human whose name she had learned was Kel settled into a routine, their interactions growing more natural with each passing moment. Jenna continued to observe Kel's resilience and adaptability to the harsh environment of Xora. She marveled at his ingenuity as he crafted tools and weapons from the resources available to them, his resourcefulness reminding her of her own survival instincts. One evening, as they sat around a fire, Jenna watched Kel as he carefully prepared a meal, his movements precise and deliberate. She noticed the way he handled the tools with ease, the way he seemed to find comfort in the simple act of cooking. She couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for him. "Where are you from?" she asked, breaking the silence, her voice laced with curiosity. Kel paused for a moment, his expression unreadable, before he replied. "Earth." "Earth," Jenna repeated, the word unfamiliar on her tongue. "And what is Earth like?" Kel smiled faintly, as if recalling a distant memory. "Earth is a world of contrasts," he said, his voice distant. "It has its beauty and its dangers, its peace and its chaos, but it is home." Jenna nodded, slowly processing his words. She could sense the deep connection Cal had to his home planet, the sense of belonging that she had never known. As the fire crackled between them, Jenna realized that this encounter was changing her in ways she could not yet comprehend. Kel was not just a survivor like herself. He was a reminder of something she had lost long ago, a sense of kinship, a shared history, a connection to something greater than herself. And for the first time in many years, Jenna felt a flicker of hope stir within her, a hope that perhaps she was not as alone as she had believed. The next day, Jenna and Kel set out to explore the surrounding area. Kel was eager to learn more about Xora and its dangers, while Jenna was determined to ensure his survival. They moved through the dense jungle with practiced ease, Jenna leading the way, her senses alert to every sound and movement. Kel followed closely behind, his eyes wide with wonder at the alien world around him. They encountered a variety of creatures, some harmless, others deadly. Jenna taught Kel how to identify the signs of danger, how to track prey, and how to defend themselves against the planet's myriad threats. Kel proved to be a quick learner, his determination and adaptability evident in his every action. As they journeyed deeper into the jungle, Jenna found herself sharing more about her past, her life on Sora her struggles and triumphs, Kale listened intently, his empathy and understanding evident in his responses. He shared stories of Earth, of his own experiences and dreams, and for the first time in a long while, Jenna felt a sense of connection, a bond forming between them. That night, as they camped under the stars, Jenna lay awake, staring up at the unfamiliar constellations, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. Cal's presence had brought a new perspective to her life, a sense of possibility that she had long since abandoned. She wondered what the future held for them, what challenges they would face together, and what they could accomplish as a team. She turned to Kale, who was lying beside her, his eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face, and for the first time in many years, Jenna allowed herself to hope for a future beyond mere survival, a future where she was not alone, where she had someone to share her journey with, someone who understood her, someone who cared. As she drifted off to sleep, Jenna realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined, and that perhaps she was not the sole Deathworlder. After all, perhaps there was more to life than just surviving. Perhaps there was a reason for her to keep going, a reason to fight for a future beyond the harsh realities of Sora. The weeks on Sora grew more intense as Jenna and Kale ventured farther from the safety of their shelter. The planet, with all its beauty and dangers, continued to test them in ways neither of them could have anticipated. But with each passing day, they became more attuned to the rhythms of the world around them. They learned how to read the land, how to track the predators that stalked them, and how to gather food from the hostile terrain. Yet, despite the growing sense of survival they had forged together, there was still an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something more was unfolding, something neither of them could ignore. One afternoon, as they navigated a dense forest of towering, jagged trees, a low growl echoed through the trees. Jenna instantly stiffened, her senses alert. The sound was unmistakable, one of Sora's apex predators. The growl was followed by the snap of twigs, the rustling of leaves. Something large was moving in their direction. "Kale, stay close," Jenna hissed under her breath, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Kale nodded, his face pale but determined. He had become proficient with the weapons Jenna had shown him, but the reality of a predator in their midst was different. Even with his new skills, he knew they were still at a disadvantage. They moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, trying to keep their movements silent. The growls grew louder, more insistent. Jenna's sharp eyes scanned the surrounding area. The predator, a massive four-legged creature with sleek, muscular limbs and glowing red eyes, was stalking them. It was a beast that had claimed the title of apex predator on this planet, capable of taking down creatures much larger than itself with lethal precision. Without warning, the creature burst from the underbrush, its fangs bared, claws clicking on the ground like a death sentence. Jenna acted without hesitation, throwing herself into the path of the creature. She slashed with her blade, catching its side in a clean stroke. The beast howled in pain, but did not retreat. Instead, it lunged at her, jaws snapping. Kale, who had been frozen for a split second, sprang into action. His weapon, a spear he had crafted himself, whistled through the air, finding its mark in the creature's side. The predator roared, momentarily distracted. It was enough. "Move," Jenna barked. "We need to get to higher ground." They scrambled up a nearby rocky outcrop, but the creature was relentless. It followed them, its muscles rippling with power, its eyes locked on them, as if nothing in this world could stand in its way. They reached a narrow ledge, the creature's massive form now looming beneath them. Jenna's heart raced, her grip tightening on her weapon. Kale stood beside her, sweat beading on his forehead, but his resolve was unwavering. "I'm not going to let it win," Kale muttered, eyes narrowed in focus. Jenna gave him a sharp glance, a rare smile tugging at her lips despite the peril. "I'm not letting it win either." The predator lunged, its claws slashing through the air just inches from Kale. With a swift movement, Jenna threw her blade, the sharp edge catching the beast's throat. It stumbled back, yelping in agony, but did not fall. Again, Jenna shouted. Kale threw himself at the creature with a newfound fury, launching his spear directly into its heart. The predator howled one final time, its body collapsing to the ground with a heavy thud. The jungle fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the two survivors. Jenna stared at the fallen beast, her heart still pounding. "That was too close," she muttered, wiping the sweat from her brow. Kale let out a long breath, his hands shaking, but his eyes alight with the thrill of survival. "We did it." Jenna turned to face him, her expression softening. "You've come a long way, Kale." He met her gaze, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I think I've still got a lot to learn." Jenna nodded, looking at the predator's body. "We both do. But we're learning together." They stood there for a moment, their bond stronger than ever, before they began to make their way back to camp. The night would come soon, and despite the danger they had just faced, there was something undeniably comforting in knowing they were no longer alone. Together, they had faced down the beast, and together, they would face whatever Xora threw at them next. The days that followed their encounter with the apex predator brought a grim understanding. Xora had shown them its fangs, but now it seemed to offer a strange kind of peace. Jenna and Kel had settled into a rhythm, a silent understanding between them that had been forged in the heat of danger. They no longer spoke much about survival. It was something they both knew too well by now. The land demanded respect, and they had learned to give it. But even amidst their growing comfort in the jungle, Kel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Xora had become more than just a place of harsh terrain and unpredictable beasts. It had become an enigma, a puzzle neither of them could solve. One evening, as they set up camp in a small hollow protected by thick underbrush, Jenna's sharp eyes caught a glint in the distance. It wasn't the reflective eyes of a predator, but something else. Something foreign. "Kale," she said softly, her voice steady but urgent. "Do you see that?" Kale, who was preparing their fire, looked up, following her gaze toward the horizon. A faint streak of light broke through the treetops, arcing in the sky like a comet. "That's not normal," he said, his pulse quickening as the thought of rescue, a chance at escape, flashed through his mind. Jenna frowned, her instincts telling her that it wasn't as simple as Cal hoped. "It could be another ship," she murmured, a touch of skepticism in her voice. "Or it could be something else entirely. Xora has a way of distorting what you think you see." But Kale didn't hear her warnings. His mind was already racing. A ship. After everything they'd been through. A lifeline. A hope. "We need to check it out," he said, already grabbing his spear. His voice held more urgency now, as if the very possibility of another survivor was something that could pull him from the isolation of Xora. Jenna gave him a look, one that he had come to recognize as a sign of her calculating mind at work. She hesitated, but then nodded. "Fine. But we're not rushing in blind," she said. "Stay sharp." They left their camp, moving quickly through the trees with a practiced ease, their senses alert for any signs of danger. As they approached the source of the streak in the sky, Cal's excitement grew, but so did the tension in the air. Xora had a way of breaking spirits, but Cal had something to prove, both to himself and to Jenna. He wasn't the same man he had been when they first met. The clearing where the object had fallen was vast, the ground cracked from the impact, smoke still rising in the air. A metallic scent stung Cal's nose as they pushed through the dense foliage. The wreckage before them was unmistakable, a ship, but not one like any Cal had ever seen. Its structure was alien, twisted in ways that defied natural disaster. He stepped forward, fingers trembling with both awe and caution. "It's a ship, but it's not from our world." Jenna was already inspecting the wreckage, her brow furrowed. "That's the understatement of the century," she said, her eyes scanning the scorched hull. "Stay close. Xora doesn't like visitors." They moved through the wreckage with care, each step deliberate. The ship had been torn apart, with systems sparking and leaking in odd patterns. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal, and something else, something Cal couldn't quite place. And then, as if in answer to the growing unease between them, a faint hum began to resonate from deep within the ship. Jenna froze, her face hardening. "We're not alone," she said softly, her hand brushing the weapon at her side. Kel's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think it's another survivor?" Jenna gave him a sharp look. "I think it's something else. Stay sharp." They moved cautiously toward the source of the hum, their weapons ready, every step calculated. The closer they got, the stronger the noise became, like the sound of a pulse, deep and steady. It didn't feel like a rescue beacon. It felt like a warning. Then, through the wreckage, they saw it, a figure, slumped and motionless. Its body was twisted in unnatural angles, a disturbing sight even in the dim light. Its skin was pallid, and its eyes, when they opened, were hollow and unnaturally dark. Cal's breath caught in his throat. "Is it human?" Jenna didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the figure. She stepped closer, her instincts screaming at her to remain cautious. But something about the figure, something unsettling about its presence, kept her from acting immediately. Then the figure stirred, a low groan escaping its lips, and the hum stopped, leaving the jungle unbearably still. Jenna's voice was a low whisper, tinged with something she rarely showed. "No, this is something worse." Cal's stomach turned. Whatever this was, they had crossed a line, and what was waiting for them next was far beyond anything Xora had thrown at them so far. As the days turned into weeks, the world of Xora seemed both unyielding and alive. The planet's vast, untamed wilderness continued to offer its harsh tests, but also small moments of wonder. Jenna and Cal had become a formidable team, no longer just surviving but thriving, learning from one another in ways neither could have imagined when they first met. One morning, as they ventured out from their shelter, Cal noticed something in the sky, a streak of light, a flash of movement. He paused, eyes narrowing as he tracked the object through the thick canopy. "What is that?" he asked, pointing upward. Jenna followed his gaze, her sharp eyes already scanning for any signs of danger. It wasn't like any bird or creature native to Xora, its shape and speed too unnatural to be of the jungle. "It looks like something from the sky," Jenna replied, a low tension in her voice. "Could it be another ship?" Cal's face lit up with excitement, his voice tinged with hope. "Maybe it's a rescue. Maybe someone else survived." Jenna's brow furrowed at his optimism. "Don't get your hopes up. On Xora, nothing is ever what it seems." Despite her caution, they followed the trajectory of the streak, navigating through the dense jungle with practiced precision. As they neared a clearing, the sound of a crash echoed through the trees, a violent tremor shaking the ground beneath their feet. Cal's heart raced. "That's it. It's coming down." Jenna was already moving ahead, her instincts sharp as ever. "We'll approach cautiously. Xora has a way of luring us into traps." They broke through the foliage, entering the clearing where the object had crashed. Before them lay the wreckage of something metal, twisted and charred, half buried in the earth. It was clearly a ship, but unlike anything Cal had seen before. Its hull was cracked open, revealing darkened interior corridors. The smell of burned fuel lingered in the air. "What happened here?" Cal whispered, moving closer. Jenna was already inspecting the wreckage, her hand brushing against the scorched surface. Not all crashes are accidents. Sometimes Xora claims what falls from the sky. Cal looked at her, unsure whether her words were a warning or just a statement of fact. "You think this is dangerous?" Jenna's gaze flickered to the wreck. "I think it's something we need to investigate, but we have to be careful." Cal nodded, gripping his spear tightly. He had become accustomed to the dangers of Xora, but this was different. This was something foreign, something they hadn't yet encountered. They made their way through the wreckage, checking the inside for any signs of life or survivors. The inside was dark, with twisted metal and fractured systems sparking intermittently. The walls were scorched and covered in a strange metallic dust. No one appeared to be inside. Then they heard it, the faintest sound, like a low hum coming from deeper within the wreckage. It was almost imperceptible, but to Jenna's trained ears, it was enough to set her on edge. "Someone's still alive in there," she said, her voice low. Cal's pulse quickened. "What should we do?" Jenna glanced at the ship's opening, her expression unreadable. "We find out who and what they are, but stay sharp." With careful steps, they approached the source of the sound, moving past the wreckage's jagged edges and toward a dimly lit compartment. The hum grew louder, almost a whisper in the stillness. As they peered inside, they saw movement, a figure, barely visible, lying motionless against the ship's wall. It was human, but its body was twisted in a way that sent a chill down Cal's spine. "Is it another human?" Cal asked, his voice barely audible. Jenna didn't answer immediately. Her focus narrowed on the figure. She approached cautiously, her hand going to her weapon, just in case. But when she saw the figure's face, pale, with dark, hollow eyes, she froze. "This isn't just another crash," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This is something worse." The figure slowly stirred, its eyes flickering open, but its expression was not one of recognition. It was something else, something darker. The hum stopped, and for a brief moment, the jungle around them felt too quiet, too still. The figure stirred again, its breathing ragged and labored. Jenna's instincts screamed at her to step back, to leave the wreckage behind and return to the safety of the jungle. But she couldn't. There was something deeply unsettling about this situation, and she needed to understand what had just happened. The pale figure's hollow eyes blinked slowly, focusing on Jenna and Cal. It didn't move at first, as if assessing them, gauging their intentions. The silence between them stretched, the air thick with the tension of an unspoken question. "Who are you?" Jenna asked, her voice firm but measured. The figure's lips parted, but the words that came out were weak, rasping, as if each syllable took tremendous effort. I don't know." Cal stepped forward, his concern growing. "What do you mean, you don't know?" The figure shifted, trying to sit up, but it winced in pain. Blood dripped from a deep gash on its forehead. "I was on the ship. We were attacked." The words were fragmented, broken like the ship that lay in ruins behind them. Cal's eyes widened. "Attacked by what?" Jenna glanced at him, her expression unreadable. She had lived through enough of Sora's brutality to know that attack could mean anything: predators, storms, or something far more sinister. "Who attacked you?" She pressed again, her voice more urgent now. The figure struggled to focus, blinking as if trying to force its memory into clarity. It wasn't like anything we've seen before. It was a creature, something, not of this world. Jenna's stomach tightened. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she absorbed his words. They had known that Sora was unlike any world they had encountered, but now, this, a creature not of this world. "How did you survive?" Cal asked, his voice laced with disbelief. The figure's gaze drifted toward the wreckage, the faintest shadow of fear crossing its gaunt features. "I was the only one left." A chill ran down Cal's spine, and Jenna felt her pulse quicken. They were no longer just survivors of a deadly world. They were now faced with something that didn't belong here, something outside the natural order of Sora. "What was the ship carrying?" Jenna asked sharply, her mind racing. The figure hesitated. "A research expedition," it said hoarsely. "We were studying Sora, its wildlife, its ecosystem. We were supposed to be the first to make contact, but something went wrong, something we didn't expect." Jenna and Cal exchanged a glance. They had been surviving in Sora's wilderness, fighting to stay alive against creatures and environments that were hostile by nature. But now they were hearing about an even greater mystery, one that didn't come from the planet at all. Before Jenna could speak again, the figure lurched forward, its body convulsing with a violent, tremoring cough. Cal rushed to its side, trying to steady it, but it collapsed back onto the ground, its strength failing. "Get back," Jenna warned, pulling Cal away. "Whatever is happening to him, it's not natural." They stepped back, instinctively raising their weapons, ready for any threat the figure might pose. But there was nothing, just the faint pulse of labored breath. The figure's body went still. Jenna scanned the wreckage again. This wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just a crash, she said. It was a warning. Whatever this creature is, whatever force brought it here, it's dangerous. We can't ignore it. Cale swallowed hard, his eyes still on the still figure. But how do we stop it? Jenna didn't have an answer. The mystery was too deep, the danger too great. The peaceful survival they had found in their partnership now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the stark reality of something far larger than either of them had ever expected. They weren't alone in this fight, and they weren't the only ones struggling to survive. "What if this is only the beginning?" Cale muttered, his voice filled with uncertainty. Jenna turned to face him, her gaze firm. "Then we face it together. We survive. We learn. And we fight." As they stood there in the shadow of the wreckage, the weight of their situation settled over them like a storm. Whatever the future held, it was no longer just about surviving the world of Thora. They had to face whatever had brought the creature here, whatever was threatening the fragile peace they had begun to build. And they would do it together.